Evening and welcome everyone. We encourage you to come on in and find a seat as we prepare for our Art and Science Cafe this evening. So we have a little bit of we're going to change it up and talk a bit tonight about the connections between art and science. And so those of you that are kind of familiar with the MDI Biolab, you'll know that we have had a long-running art meets science program here at the lab because we are really fascinated by the different ways in which those two disciplines are connected and how sort of mutually beneficial they are in terms of helping explain some of the more complex concepts in both art and science. And so it's a program that we have run as an experiment. We learn every time we do a program, and we love the feedback that we receive from all of you as we continue to refine our approach. A big part of our art and science initiatives are these lectures that we give occasionally, but we also have an artist in residence program. We have an exhibit that's currently down on our lower campus, and so if you're interested in taking a peek at that, just reach out to one of us here at the lab. We'd be more than happy to share that with you. And then we also do a lot of tours, tailored tours that we do of many of our most famous art museums across the country. So if those are things that you are interested in, come talk to me or one of my colleagues here, and we'd be happy to tell you a little bit more about that program. But tonight we are thrilled to have Dr. Hermann Haller, who is the president of the MDI Biolab, and by his professional job is a physician scientist, and he specializes in understanding kidney and vascular disease, but he moonlights as a very passionate art historian and very dedicated art historian. And so tonight, we are going to take you on sort of a magical carpet ride as we start in Switzerland, and then we go to Germany, and then we go to Italy, and then we're going to take a right turn and come back to Bar Harbor. So buckle up. It's going to be a fast-paced show, and we're very excited to explore with you the connections between Paul Klee and marine biology. So with that, I'm going to welcome Dr. Haller.
Thank you very much, Terry. I don't think the problem is buckle up. I think the problem is not falling asleep, because it will be a long, meandering talk. We'll talk about Paul Klee, you can see that. We'll talk about marine biology, and we'll talk about Bar Harbor and Naples. And this brings together a few things I really like a lot. And it goes back a long time. I remember talking about Anton Dohrn, and at the end of the day, you will have a thorough understanding who Anton Dohrn actually is. I think I talked about Anton Dohrn at John Forrest's retirement lecture, or when we had a symposium and I gave this lecture. So bear with me, and don't hesitate to ask questions in between, because we'll cover a lot of ground. And this took some time to prepare, and I'm basically constantly working on that. This morning, and I'll read this out, I found a letter very nicely organized by David Evans in our archives, which is directly related to our topic. So let's start. From Naples to Bar Harbor, Paul Klee and marine biology. Jerry said, I'm an art historian by training. Yes, I am. And I'm always afraid, when I prepare for art history talks or when we go to the museum, I always have these friends of mine who became directors of museums or professors of departments, and I'm always afraid, oh my God, they look over my shoulders and they say, this nephrologist, he does some art work. So I try to be as professional as possible. So Paul Klee was born in Switzerland in 1879. His father was a musician, a music teacher, and they actually wanted Paul, both the mother and father, to become a musician. By the age of 12, he was playing with the Bern Symphony Orchestra. So for a long time, he couldn't make up his mind. But then it was also a sort of rebellion. He started studying in Munich at the academy. And in 1911, he became a member of the expressionist movement in Munich along with Vasily Kandinsky, who had been a friend of his for quite a while, with Franz Marc and August Macke. And this is not Paul Klee, but this is Macke, you can see there. For those of you who are not that familiar with Expressionism, this tells a lot about what Paul Klee actually wanted. Expressionism at that time, this is painting, which is not so much expressing or showing what you see, but depicting your emotions, your expression. It's all about getting yourself onto the painting. And you can see this very easily. It's called in Munich, Der Blaue Reiter, which means the blue horseman. And for some of you, I will tell you how the name actually came all about. But this shows you Kandinsky. It shows you Mark here with the blue horses, and you can see displayed a row there. This is Paul Klee, a little bit later, but also a wonderful watercolor. And here you see Mary Wigman, actually, expressionist dancer, and this gives you an impression what expressionism is all about. You want to change society. You want to come together in a group, and you want to have a better society than the one before. And then he went back to Munich, and in 1921, he joined the Bauhaus in Dessau near Dresden. And you all know what Bauhaus is, because this is, we all know what Expressionist is still to this day, but Bauhaus was really a movement where they now, and it's the same desire of Klee to change society, to bring together again art and society. And this dissociation, and to be honest, this is something what we do here when we talk about art and science, because they are so far apart. And we strongly believe that we are branches from the same tree. So it's the same desire to bring this together, and this is what they did at the Bauhaus. I'll show you a couple of examples here. So from teapots, which are famous, to grips, to architecture, and all of them had to leave Germany in 1932, 1933. And this is why Gropius came to the US, because of the Nazis. And Paul Klee went into exile back to Switzerland. And Kandinsky, they all had to leave Germany because of political problems. And we won't go into all the problems we have at the moment, but this was a very comparable time. And so he went back to Switzerland, and he went into exile. Now, those of you who know Paul Klee know that he painted fish, lots of fish. Not only fish, I mean, he was very prolific. He did wonderful paintings. His graphic work is great. To be honest, he only learned really to work with colors after he had went to Tunis in Northern Africa with his friends Macke and Marc, Macke in 1914. But fish, and here you see a couple of examples. And I'll show you two of the famous paintings of Klee in the US with fish. So this is Paul Klee, 1925, Fish Magic, Die Magie der Fische in Germany, and this is Philadelphia Museum of Art. This is a famous painting. And you may look at this, and here you see all the ingredients of Klee, really. But you see the fish? Is it underwater? Not really. I mean, there is this guy here, for instance. I mean, either he has already drowned, but it's definitely not underwater. You see a lot of diagrams here, so it's mystical in a way. It's also childish. But when you look at the technique, all of a sudden it becomes marine. Because the way you do this, you remember you did this in school. You cover the surface with wax and different colors, and then you coat it with black. That's one of the inventions of Paul Klee. And then you scratch. And this is what scientists do. They scratch the surface, which is black, and they don't know what's beneath that. And then they find colors. And then, in fact, they try to organize it like Klee did, you know. I think the way he did this is that he scratched the surface and then he saw a color, and then only he thought about the object. Perhaps he did it the other way around, but and then in the middle of this, and it was done in 1925, it's very surrealistic. It has some transparent cotton on it, and you can actually move that. So all of a sudden, there's also science in the painting, and it looks childish. So what Klee is bringing together is really art, which on the one hand looks like a child could have done this, but then very sophisticated. And the more you think about it, the more you get into the painting. To be honest, there is not a lot of description, neither about this painting or the next I'm going to show you, when you go to the museums. It says Paul Klee, magic fish, and this is typical of Paul Klee. But what I just explained is something what you find when you look more closely. And I think Klee was coming back to the fish. You'll see this in a moment, when he was established and when he was thinking a lot about nature. And this is also true for the other one. This is one of the Klee paintings in the Museum of Modern Art. Now here, fish is also in the title, around the fish. Everything around the fish. So the fish is actually central. And the way it looks, it's, well, you eat fish, sure. But then you look at all the symbols around that, and to be honest, they are also magical, but they're also scientific. This here could be a sushi, or an atom, or a molecule, or something Klee was, I think, thinking a lot about, and then finding something which is original Klee. We don't know actually what it means. It's not a citation of an atom, but the same is happening in the other symbols which you see here. You also have herbs in there, so the fish is actually really to eat. But I think this both gives you an impression that fish were important to him. I've shown you a couple of other examples. We will not go into that. But throughout his life, he was coming back to fish. And the question was, why? And this is now the link to marine biology. So here you see again, you know, some of us like this here best. And some of us think this is very famous. It's about, in every German school book I have seen over the last 50 years, this fish is in there, but no explanation why Paul Klee actually was interested in fish. And here you can see other examples. So throughout his life, fish. So why fish? And we have to go back into a time when Paul Klee had just finished his first year at the academy in Munich. And this shows him, this is in 1902, with his friend, very ironical, Hermann Haller. I can't help it. It was, they went to school together. Hermann Haller became a sculptor. There's actually a Hermann Haller museum in Zurich. And I can see we have aficionados of sculpture here in the room. Well, I have mixed feelings about Hermann Haller and his art, but nonetheless, the two of them went together because Klee was trying to find out what to do with his life. I can tell you, I have pictures like this with me and my friends hanging out in Italy also, and when I read his diaries, I mean, I think every 23-year-old, they write the same type of diaries, you know, about girls and about life and what they wanted to do with their life, and this is why they went to Italy. 7 months. So here you see the two of them hanging out. This is typical. Actually, they had a falling out. they then parted for a while because Klee wrote, he's getting on my nerves, he's too vulgar. I should have realized this before. But then they didn't see each other for 3 months, and then they met again, and oh, now we are best friends, and like we had never parted. And that's all in his diary. So they are in Rome together, and you think, going to Italy, you get to know Italian art, Renaissance art, Baroque art. I mean, Italy is full of that. And he wrote back postcards like this. So this is Rome, the Forum Romanum. And then you can see here, so I can move up, sorry about that. Rome does not speak to me. I cannot find any artistic connection with our times. I need expressionism. He didn't say that. And to create something outside of one's own age strikes me as suspect. This is actually what you expect from a 23-year-old who's trying desperately to find his goal in life. So this is a postcard to one of his friends. And then he went all by himself, without Hermann Haller, to Naples. Now you imagine this is the Gulf of Naples. We'll come back to this in a letter from the lab. Onto Naples, you have the Gulf, the Baroque city, you have museums. We'll go to Naples next year, hopefully, and they have a famous museum. You have Pompeii next to Naples. You have the volcano you can see there. And where did he go? He went into the aquarium. Now, we'll talk about this aquarium in a moment, but this is what he saw in there. And these were postcards you could actually find in the, you could buy in the aquarium. So Klee wrote in his diary, for the first time after all these frustrating weeks and months in Rome, the aquarium is extremely stimulating. And the next day, he wrote to his fiancée, she's a pianist, she was a pianist in Munich. Finally, I became religious and admired the splendor of divine colors, all under the surface, and no one can see it. Now, doesn't bring this to mind immediately the painting from Philadelphia, which we have just seen, which he did then more than 20 years later. So this is this one moment, and he went back and made remarks about this, where he encountered fish, but not only fish, but nature. And this opened his eyes that this is to understand what's happening. Unfortunately, there was a lot of science going on, and we don't know about whether he learned about the science at the time, but we'll talk about this in a moment. So this is what the aquarium looked like. It was the first aquarium in Europe which opened for the public. And they did a great job, we'll come back to this, in advertising this. So the aquarium was in every book, and it was at the Zoologische Station, the Stazione Zoologica at Naples. What is the Stazione Zoologica Anton Dohrn? This whole palace is a biological research station. It was built there in 1871 by one person, Anton Dohrn. He, we'll talk about this in a moment, he founded this on the coast of Naples. How do you do that? I mean, we are here because the Rockefellers gave us the land. Who gave the land to Anton Dohrn? There is a wonderful biography written by our first president, the first German president, in 1848. Dohrn actually went and convinced the mayor of Naples to give him the land. And then he started building, and he brought together a lot of people, and we'll talk about this in a moment. Here you can see where it's situated. This is the lab. Here is the ocean. So this is the imperial park where they gave him the land to build this. I always admire people like this convincing authorities actually to support that. And he found friends. He had been in Italy before, and Sicily, and it was very international. So Anton Dorn spoke German because he's German. He spoke Italian. With his wife, he communicated in French, but she was Russian, so he could speak Russian. And the family was from Poland. So this is how they communicated with each other, and his friends and the people he worked with, they were all on the same level. And this is why Theodor Heuss, our first president, wrote a biography almost 100 years later about Anton Dorn, because this is one of the large and famous families in Germany. So this is what it looked like. So he built this like a palace. And he had to, because here on our campus, a thing like that would be terrible. So we build according to where we are, and this is what he did. So art historians write articles about that it's like one of the Baroque churches. And this also links then at that time biology and art, because he was not interested in the building really. That was just part of what you had to do. He was interested in the science. So how is Anton Dorn linked to MDI? And this is the first photograph which I saw in the book. And this is the Hegner lab around 1940. You know, this is how we did research in the old days. I mean, you were working here at these benches and you were looking at a marble bust, somebody watching over you. And this is the bust. It's huge. It's 200 pounds. It's about that size. And you can see it, it's in the Kinner Library on display. So this is how I got to know actually Anton Dorn. I had no idea. I didn't read the biography. I learned about Anton Dorn here at the lab, and then I went and did some research on that. So who is Anton Dorn? He was born into a very rich family. The family is from Stettin towards the Polish border, and they made their money with sugar from Brazil. But the father was also interested in insect research. He was the president of the first entomological society of Germany, and he was a musician. He could sing operas by heart. He was invited to the royal court in Prussia several times, just with a piano, and he was singing whole opera. So this gives you an idea of where art and science comes from. Somebody who is really a businessman, and he's interested in insects and builds a museum, and is interested in music, and that's his background. So it's music and insects. He studied then biology with Ernst Haeckel in Jena, and I'll talk about this in a moment, and he was a fervent supporter of Charles Darwin. Because at that time, biology, that was all about, are you for or are you against Darwin? So Darwin had published The Descent of Man. And the discussion was, do we believe that? It was not only about creation, but it was about the different ways to make an interpretation that we came from somewhere, but how did this all work out? And Terry and Emily and I, we were in Cambridge actually last November, and we had a wonderful visit to the Cambridge University Library, and we were privileged guests, and they asked us beforehand, what do you want to see? And I said, well, I'd like to see the letters Anton Dorn and Darwin exchanged. And they said, well, unfortunately, Darwin's letters are all in Naples. but we can show you Anton Dorn's letters. So for the first time, here's a very nice, very small handwriting. We could read the letters because he wrote to Darwin a lot. So he studied with Ernst Haeckel, and this is lovely Jena. And I'm showing you this because a month ago, one of our students won the first poster prize at a meeting on aging and regeneration in Jena. So this is classical. They still have a department and named after Haeckel. And this shows you a very famous biologist at the time, Darwinist Ernst Haeckel. This shows you Haeckel in society. And this shows you Haeckel at work. This is what you did as a marine biologist, because when you were a Darwinist, you had to study the ocean. So those of you who know Darwin, you can do evolutionary hypothesis with birds, but the ocean is much better because you have many more animals, you have a high turnover, it's very fast, and this is why they all went to the coast and collected and sampled, and then they went back home. Now I can tell you, to go from the North Sea, this is taken in Helgoland off the German coast, from there to Jena, most of your species are rotten by the time you arrive in Jena. So Anton Dorn had this brilliant idea while he was a student there. He can describe this in his diaries. On the 24th of December, he was walking from Jena to Weimar, and he all of a sudden thought, we need a lab at the sea. It was not the start, to be honest, of marine biology labs. There were others. There was one in Brittany 5 years before, and then there was a little hut in the dunes in the Netherlands. And actually, Harvard had a small hut out on Penny Keys Island, which didn't survive for a very long time. So he was not the first thinking about that, but he was the first then driving this forward. Now, getting back to Haeckel, I told you this is when research started. You know, Darwin didn't do a lot of experimental research. He just sailed to the Galapagos, watched all these birds, came up with ideas afterwards, and the next generation then did these experiments. So that's from Haeckel, 1874, to prove, using embryology, that we are all coming from the same origin. You can see this here. Fish, salamander, turtle, birds, pig, bee, rabbits, and humans. So basically, we all look the same. And this is what he tried to prove there, doing descriptive research, but still under the microscope. And then he generated, on the basis of that, how courageous, the whole tree as he saw it. And this is what I mean by competition. There were other trees out there. It was not just the one, but based on your research, and they had all these raging discussions, which of the branches is actually real and which one is not real. And this is how it started. And this is still what we do in developmental biology. Sometimes we forget why we are doing specific small projects, but basically it's all the same to understand what's going on there. But at the same time, somebody like Haeckel was influenced by art. Just looking through the microscope, doing science, that he considered this to be not noble. What he did is, when he looked through the microscope, then he made diagrams of what he was seeing under the microscope, and you can immediately see that this is symmetry, and he meant this to be scientific. He said, I can see the symmetry, and this is how nature develops, via these symmetrical forms, and then he organized it in a symmetrical form and propagated this, and it was hugely successful. First of all, it's beautiful. They still have samples of that in Jena in the museum. You can see that sometimes he overdid it a little bit. I mean, I don't think that all fish look crystalline like that, but that's what how he wanted to see the world, and we are still trying. I can tell you this as a scientist, we still try to get things into shape so that it fits into what we believe. And he published. That's Art Forms in Nature. Now, this book sold like crazy. 17 editions within 5 years, around 1900. Isn't that great? I mean, all these people reading this book, they were informed about biology. They understood biology in the way Haeckel understood it, so perhaps we can still debate that. But this is art and science, or science and art. This is hard to tell. But it also belongs into a certain time. So you can see immediately that Art Nouveau, which was the raging fashion at the time, is directly influenced by that. Actually, at the World Exhibition in Paris, they stole from his book some of the designs for the entrance of the World Exhibition, because they thought this is how we transform biology into art. And as I said, you can see this immediately with all these decorative forms, that they are influenced by Haeckel. Or was it the other way around? Not really, because his book was earlier than that, so it was really very influential on art. So now we go back to Anton Dohrn. I've told you that he convinced Naples to build that. How do you raise money for that? We'll come back to this in a moment, but here you can see where the fascination comes from, because it's actually exactly our problem. You want to build a wonderful research institution, you're fully convinced this is what the world needs, and then you have to find the donors for that, and you have to find the resources for that. You have to call your friends, you have to hire people. So I could tell you for 2 more hours what he did in the beginning and who came and all that. But you can see, and I've talked about this before, he built this like a palazzo. And then in the central room behind this balcony, this is where he said, here we need art. And this is the so-called fresco room. So you can see they were still a little bit like when they traveled in Italy and were 23. This is Dohrn on the left-hand side, and his friends who came and helped him to build this wonderful lab. And these 3 were his friends. So this is Alfons von Hildebrand. This was a very famous sculptor at the time. This is Hans von Marais. And this is Charles Grant. He was actually a teacher, an English teacher. He had got to know in Jena, who translated works from German poets into English. So they formed this first group, not organizing the science, but being there for the art. And Hildebrand was responsible for sculpture, and Marais was responsible for painting. And this is what he did. So this shows you this fresco room. So the reliefs are from Hildebrand, and these are the paintings. And this is how Marais, together with Anton Dohrn, saw science. So that's on one side of the fresco room. This is the scientists bringing the boats into the water for the scientific edition. And here, they are rowing together and moving forward. This is now famous. In the National Gallery in Berlin, the sketch for this painting is on display permanently. So Hans von Marais is one of the painters, also end of the 19th century, but quite famous. And this is where they want to go. You know, the island, this actually is Capri, which is out in the Gulf. And these are the people who are actually doing this. This group you have seen before. This is Dr. Kleinberger. He's actually from Russia. And this is Anton Dorn. You can see that Anton Dorn had also a side where he was sometimes a bit more depressed. He was not happy all the time. And it went away, but I think when you do such a big thing, it's to be expected that you are not optimistic all the time. And you can see this in the painting. I don't know who the woman is. I don't know who the beggar is. And I do not know who the dog is. But this is the fresco room bringing together art and science in the Stazione. Whoop. Now, you have to bear with me. I have to talk a little bit how you organize an institution like this, because it's so very near to us and to our goals. So how did these dedicated scientists run a successful institute? So for instance, he was a friend of Dorn. He wanted him to be the director. And he was a great scientist, but he was a terrible organizer. He showed up 3 hours late in the morning being drunk. He was cynical, and whenever he had a great idea, he destroyed the idea immediately. They didn't get along. They had a falling out. He became professor in Messina 5 years later, and he wrote a thankful letter to Anton because he had helped him there. And this group, they were just a painter and scientist, so he had to have ideas, and he had to organize, and he had to run this institute. And this is the budget. I like this a lot. I mean, this is a bit less complicated than our budget, but here you see 1888, 1913, 1935, and you can see lab rent, others, lab rent Italy, lab rent Germany, aquarium publications, patents and export. Looks like us. So this is how he organized the institute. And what I find especially interesting are details. He was inventive. In Jena at the time, in 1871, Zeiss was formed. Ernst von Abbe, he formed Zeiss. He was the founder of Zeiss. And Dorn immediately made a contract with Zeiss. You give us your latest microscope, and we publish on that. We get the microscopes for free, and you don't have to pay for the publication. Wonderful collaboration. So the institute was known, and here you see the comparison with MDI BL, for having the best microscopes in the world. And it was terribly important because I can tell you at that time, nobody in Italy made a microscope. He was very good at PR. So I already told you about the aquarium. The aquarium was founded in 1872. Within 4 years, he got the aquarium in every single tourist guide on the planet. So this is from the Baedeker in 1878. So the Stazione became worldwide. It was not the hidden secret of Naples at the time. And then he did fundraising. Alfred Krupp, richest man in Germany, steel baron, had his house on Capri. He was invited. Actually, he did experiment in the lab for a while. And I don't know about the donations. I know that the Krupp family gave one vessel, a large boat, to the lab. And this is Rudolf Virchow. And Rudolf Virchow was not only a famous scientist and a pathologist, but he was also in the Prussian government, in the German government at the time. And here, this is a letter, actually a postcard from Dorn to Rudolf Virchow. My dear Virchow, the holidays in Sicily are very pleasant. Did you have a chance to discuss the matter of the research vessel in Parliament? That was the end of the postcard. With regards, Anton Dorn. And then he did something which is really at the core of what we are doing and what they were doing. They were international. These are renting out lab space. And here you can see over the years the different tables. They rented out not whole labs, but really benches. And you can see Prussia, Bavaria, Max Planck Society, the German Research Council, different universities. In the US, the Smithsonian, the Women's Association, Columbia, Carnegie, Rockefeller, they all rented every year tables in the institute and sent scientists. The UK, Cambridge, Oxford, Royal Society, and then these countries as well. Unfortunately, or fortunately for marine biology, all these countries started to build their own marine biology stations. In the US, we had during this period formed 3 on the East Coast, 4 on the East Coast, and on the West Coast, even Austria, and they don't even have an ocean. They had to go to Trieste, to the Mediterranean. They founded institutes. We have 5 in France. So this is how it all started from Anton Dohrn. In 1897, at the 25th anniversary, an address signed by friends and scientists of the Institute, 525 from Germany, 135 from the US, 64 from France. Not that many from France, because at that time, you know that Germany and France were more at war than they were at peace for most of the 19th century. And these are the Americans who went there. You can see Morgan was there for several winters, because you normally went there. Whitman, the founder of MDI Biological, he was the 3rd president of Tufts, which is interesting because Tufts is basically our mother institution in 1898. And so he's been here. And Wheeler from Harvard, these are just a few of them who went regularly to the island. And with that, we are almost done. One important question remains. And the question is, how did the marble bust of Anton Dohrn actually got here? We know this, and I'll read out a letter in a moment, which I found this morning in our archives. So it was donated by the Warburg family in 1938. So you've seen the picture, 1940 in the Hagner lab. And the Warburg family from Hamburg in Germany, very rich banker family. There's a Warburg Bank in Hamburg. There's one in London. There is the Warburg Courtauld Institute. So I had art historians in the family also in London. And there is the Warburg Bank in New York City. And Paul Warburg, he was the first director of the Warburg Bank, and he was co-founder of the National Reserve. He actually is responsible for the National Reserve because he wrote article after article that the US need a national reserve like other countries. And then he finally succeeded in that. And I think I'll read part of this right now. I can't resist it. So this letter, that we are not Cambridge. So this is a letter from Ulrich Dahlgren. He was president of the lab in 1938, and we have the Dahlgren there, and he writes to Reinhard Dohrn, not to Anton Dohrn, because Anton Dohrn had died in 1908, but Reinhard Dohrn is his son. And Dahlgren writes, "Dear Dr. Dohrn, the other day I received a letter from Mrs. Paul Warburg of New York telling me that she was clearing up the effects of her husband, who died recently, 1938, and was proposing to reduce her menage in view of his death and her own advanced age. And she told me, what I already knew, that she and her husband had been very devoted friends of your father, Anton Dohrn, and had made a very fine marble bust of him, which was in their hallway for the remainder of Mr. Warburg's life. And he informs Reinhard Dohrn that they want to give the bust to MDI-BL because she asked if our laboratory in Bar Harbor would care to receive it and mount it in one of our rooms, which we now actually do. I was delighted, and it is so arranged. And then he goes on that this is appropriate because Frenchman's Bay on a good day looks like the Gulf of Naples. And there are mountains over there. With a little bit of imagination, you could think that they are small Vesuvius. So volcanoes. But the principal thing is that we are a marine biological laboratory in the formative stage, a stage that would easily compare with the laboratory that your father was working to build up into the present splendid organization. I hope that his likeness looking over our labors will be an inspiration and help us to as fine an end. And then, and I had no idea about that, then our president, MDI-BL president, goes on like, the first period I spent in Naples was when your father was still with us. The second winter I spent with you. And the next year, when I will step down from the position here at MDI-BL, I'm planning to come back to Naples and spend another season with you again. So this tells you it's not only the bus there, and all the other scientists, but there is a strong relationship between Naples, this bus. To be honest, they wanted it back. In 1879, they wrote to us and said, we are having an exhibition in Paris at the UNESCO, and we have nothing of Anton Dohrn. We need the bust. Actually, they had a little bit of stucco thing, and it was not in a very good shape. And the first response was, yes, we could do that, because they wanted to have also an exhibition at Woods Hole, and we would send it to Woods Hole, and then we would go back with the remainder of the exhibition to Naples. But then Ray Rappaport had second thoughts. He wrote another letter, I will not read that, and he wrote and said, well, he was writing to the president of the Station at the time, and he said, well, after rereading what the donors actually wanted, we cannot give it back to you. They wanted it to be at MDI-BL and not in Naples. So we are very sorry about that, but you'll be here and we'll take care of it, and thank you very much. We have reached out now to them, and we'll have a symposium with the Station next spring. We will organize this together in a trip, hopefully with donors to art and science, not only in Naples, but in Italy. Now, a couple more slides. First, I thought that it was actually carved as part of the original decoration. So there were 3 statues in there. So this is Adolf von Hildebrand made them. This is Ernst von Baer, famous geneticist. And this is Charles Darwin, obviously, there. And I thought Anton Dohrn, but you can easily see the quality is different. And he was much younger at that time. So this is an interesting person. This is the sister-in-law, Mary Warburg, of Paul. And she was married to an art historian, a very famous art historian, A.B. Warburg. And she was a sculptor, and I thought, well, perhaps she has something to do with it, because she knew Hildebrand, because they were living together, not living together, but in Florence at the time. But no, it's this young man. Because his name is Fritz Behn. He was invited to the Stazione in the year Anton Dorn died to make a fountain there. He was famous for his animal work. So he did all sorts of animals, and he was invited to build this fountain in the Stazione. And you can see here again what a wonderful building this is, a palazzo. And he made the bust. We can see this because it's signed when you look very carefully with a B up there. So we know that this was Fritz Behn. And now, this is my last slide, I promise. When Paul Klee was in Munich in 1901, that was his first year when he started to study there, and he was part of the secession. Fritz Behn was there as well. So basically, they were part of the same artist organization with new ideas about art and what art should be like. And they were members of the Secession, an association of visual artists who broke away from the mainstream to promote and defend their own art. And this shows you a little bit of that. However, while Paul Klee stayed the course and went to the Bauhaus and then into exile, unfortunately, Fritz Behn went the other way. He was a very acclaimed sculptor through the 30s and into the 40s, into the 50s and the 60s in Germany. He died in 1970. But the Warburg family was great friends with Fritz in the beginning, but then they had a falling out about political views in the 1930s. Thank you very much for your attention. I know it was a little bit long and meandering, but I hope it was interesting enough to keep you awake. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Yeah.
Why not ask a question?
Yeah.
How have you organized your artist in residence program? Do you have certain criteria that you're looking for, or is it an open call internationally to just anyone?
Well, it
Well, I
was,
get to be right.
well, it's more like the way Anton Dorn worked, that there are connections and we know people, and then we have proposals for that. And to be honest, it has to do with science and art, and to be honest, it's very difficult because when, for instance, we do microscopy, and our microscopy pictures are pieces of art by itself. So when you invite somebody to do this, it has to reflect on art. I think you at COA, you have this wonderful example of land art, which actually transforms your campus in a way which is, I mean, this line is on the one hand new, rearranges the campus, is part of the campus all of a sudden. So it's difficult. So we had an artist in residence from the UK, and he was before working with other academic institutions. And for him, we have still some parts of the exhibition in our library, but he fell actually in love with our microscopists. So they did wonderful projects together, but it was not that much artists in residence. So as I said, we have no program, we're not advertising it because we still don't have a real feel for a program. It's more on an individual basis. Yes.
This is a little history. I'm a lab kid, and in 1956, I accompanied Roy Forster, who was a professor of, I think, biology at Dartmouth, as a friend of his daughter, to Europe for 6 months for a trip. He took a sabbatical to all the biolabs in Europe. And in 56, we spent 1 whole month in Naples. And I wish I had known that history that you just given, it was, he went off to work, and we crawled through all the museums in Europe. So it was great.
Very
But-
interesting. So
but-
when was that, 1956?
1956, yes.
So we'll see, they have now in Naples a museum, Anton Dorn, which is adjacent to this, and it will be very interesting to go there. They don't do a lot of biomedical research. It's more oceanography, it's more plants and the ocean. But nonetheless, one of our scientists has been there and gave a talk about 12 years ago. But so far, we had not a lot of relationships. So when I first reached out, I got a very stern letter back from the president and said, well, we have been thinking about that. And yes, I think it's appropriate because it seems that your goals and our goals are somewhat the same. So let's proceed. Yes.
Was Paul Klee religious? Because I really know nothing about him, but yet I see the fish imagery and one of the slides you showed has a cross in it, so I just curious.
We don't know really. I mean, not at that time. I can see from his diary. He wrote a diary starting at around 1890 till 1918, and after that we only have remarks. He mentioned a little bit that he was playing music in church, but he didn't go every Sunday, so we don't know about that. However, you mentioned the crosses and religious symbols in there. Paul Klee developed a serious disease in the 30s. He suffered from scleroderma, which is really a terrible disease, so it was very painful. And in his last painting, actually, was very dark, there are also religious symbols in there. So I don't know really, I can't answer your question, but I think at the time, the Bauhaus was quasi-religious, you know, because when you believed in Bauhaus, all the ideas, how you deal, it was not religion like Catholic Church, but I think he was religious. And you can also see from the diary I quoted that when he wrote to his fiancée, now, and this is what he said, I became religious when I was in the aquarium. So I think, yes, religious in a way, but not traditional. Yeah.
But the fish imagery also.
Yeah. And then he rarely, I mean, he was, but it's a good question. We after 1918, we don't have a lot of documentation. And then he was, you know, associated with definitely not religious people. Kandinsky was grown up in Russia and Russian Orthodox, but definitely not religious in the classical way. Okay.
Thank you so much. So thank you. And thank you all for being here with us this evening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I want to just tell you a little bit about some upcoming events that we have. This is a busy couple of weeks for us here at MDIBL. On Wednesday, we have our annual Family Science Night. So if you have little people that you would like to encourage to get excited about science, all of our students that are with us actually put together activities and demonstrations, and they are tasked with communicating their work to folks who are about this high, which is a lot of fun. And actually, our students go through a rigorous communications program, and they learn how to put their work into terms that folks can understand. I've had a couple people say to me, do we have to have kids to come? Can we just come? Everybody should come. It's a lot of fun. It's actually our favorite event that we do all year. And we fight over who gets to wear the axolotl costume. So just saying, it's a lot of fun. So it starts at 4 o'clock, I think, on Wednesday. Our whole campus is turned into essentially an outdoor science fair. So it's a lot of fun, very festive atmosphere. We encourage you to join us. Then the following week, we have a couple of Star Point Society events. We have our annual meeting, which is on Thursday. It begins at 10 a.m., I think. Dr. Haller will give a wonderful update of the science that's happening here at MDIBL. Our corporation will be here, and then we'll have a luncheon at noon, where we'll do some recognition and celebrate a few things. So would love to have you, as many of you would like to join us, we would love to have you here for that. And then we will gather for our next Science Cafe on August 11th. So a little bit of a pause as we kind of work through some of these traditional events that we do in the summer. And our next speaker will be Dr. Travis Carney, who this will be his first Science Cafe. So he works here at the MDI Biolab with Dr. Helena Shabata, and they study the fruit fly. So this is the time of year when all of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with fruit flies. I know that I have a few in my kitchen from time to time. So it's a great opportunity to learn a little bit about the power of this tiny little organism in research and what it is teaching us about diseases like muscular dystrophy and other things. So hope you will join us for that. It'll be a great presentation, and Travis is a wonderful science communicator. So with that, I want to just close and tell Dr. Haller I owe you an apology, because for 25 years, we've had this bust of Anton Dorn in the library, and some people, I won't say who, might decorate him for the holidays. So he's worn bunny ears, and sometimes he wore a Santa hat, and I feel really bad now because he was actually really, but now we have a new respect for Anton Dorn. Anyway, thank you all so much for joining us. It was great to see you all this evening.